Lindsay Sturkey, and welcome to Simple Spiritual Practices. In each episode of this podcast, we'll talk about one tangible practice that will help you know yourself and God better. Most of these practices can be done in 5 minutes or less, so you can easily try it out today. If you are ready to experience real growth in your life, or if you want fresh ideas on how to approach your time with God, this podcast is for you. When I was a very small child, probably around 3 or so, I was apparently a very outgoing and talkative kid. My mom tells the story of taking me to the grocery store, and as we went up and down the aisles, I would sing, say hi to strangers, and be very offended if they didn't say hi back, and loudly ask my mom awkward questions about other people. This is not a child you would describe as timid. Now, it always surprises me when she tells me about how I was as a little girl, because that is not at all how I am today. Now, you might think that I'm a talkative person or even outgoing because, well, I talk for multiple minutes on this podcast every week. But in social settings, and especially in places where I don't know anyone, I'm generally pretty quiet. I'm not the one who will introduce myself to someone I don't know or go up to a stranger to strike up a conversation. I'm more of an observer than the life of the party, and I am completely okay with that. But it's interesting to notice that as a very small girl, I wasn't afraid to show up in the world. And then somewhere along the way, something happened and I became timid and shy. I remember being in maybe first or second grade and hiding behind my mom when someone I didn't know would try to talk to me. As I got older, I generally was the quiet one in school, and I just didn't really want to draw attention to myself. I became timid and uncertain of myself and how I should show up in the world. Now, my true and authentic self, I think, is somewhere in between the loud little girl in the grocery store and the timid child hiding behind her mom. These days, I don't feel pressure to be outgoing, but I am also learning what it means to fully show up as who I am. But there are times when it's like that timid little girl that's still inside tells me to hide from everyone, to not speak up or show up, to simply fade into the background and not cause a scene or disturb the peace. These are the moments I'm being driven by fear. Fear of what people will think of me, or fear that I'm either not enough or too much. On the other hand, there have also been times in my life when showing up goes to this other extreme and turns into a performance. I only thought it was okay to be seen if I was doing things right. So I would show up with my talents and in my strength, hiding the rest of me, my weaknesses, or the things I wasn't sure about because of fear of what other people would think. So I was showing up in the world, but only letting a small part of me be seen. I wasn't hiding, I was performing. So the question this leads me to is this: what does it really mean to show up as my true and authentic self in the world? Not to perform and try to convince everyone that I'm good, and also not to hide or be timid, holding back who I am in fear, but to show up as me, without pressure, and also without being timid because of fear. But the thing is, I think there is another question that we have to consider even before that one. Because before we know how to show up as our true and authentic selves in the world, first we have to answer, well, who am I really? Because how can I show up as my authentic self if I don't even know who that is? Now, there are a lot of layers to that question of who am I, but I think it's an important one, and especially when it comes to growing spiritually, because spiritual growth is a process of becoming who God has created us to be in Christ, not trying to be who we think we should be, but walking in the freedom of who we are, as we are also being transformed by the power of Jesus so that we're also becoming more like Him. To show up in the world as our true selves, it requires self-awareness. So let's ask God how He sees us, to pay attention to who we are and to who we are not. So today I want to invite you to do a simple practice that will help you begin to see who you are and who you are not, and why that matters in your process of spiritual growth. For me, I have found so much freedom in letting go of the pressure to be someone that I'm not. See, I used to look at people who were more outgoing, people who could strike up a conversation with anyone or always seemed like they felt comfortable in a crowd, and I would think, why can't I be more like that? Instead of celebrating the good things I saw in that person, I would compare myself and feel like I was missing something because I wasn't more like them. So these days, I've kind of let go of that expectation that I should be more outgoing. Now, there are times, of course, that I still have to move outside of my comfort zone and do things that don't come naturally to me. But most of the time, I don't have to force myself to be someone that I'm not, and it's okay that I'm not outgoing or the take charge type. So here's a really simple practice that can help you to do that, to name and identify some things that you are and some things that you're not. So here's what to do. You're going to grab a piece of paper and draw a circle in the middle, leaving some space around the outside of the circle as well. So that circle represents you, who you are. Those lines are kind of the boundary of who you are, and the outside of the circle represents not you, the things that are outside of who you are. So as you look at that circle, ask yourself two simple questions. What is true about me, and what is not true about me? So inside the circle, you're going to write down a few words that come to mind when you think about who you are, what is true about you. And then outside the circle, write down a few words that describe things that are not true about you, things that just don't line up with who God has made you to be. Now, don't overthink this or get too terribly deep about it. As you do this practice, just write down whatever comes to mind. And also, what's really important here, I want you to ask God to show you how He sees you, because this is not a time to beat ourselves up about who we think we should be. This is simply meant to help us embrace who we actually are, to let go of the things that are simply not ours to hold, and to see the beauty of the unique person that God has made you to be. Now, this is more about personality and how you're wired. It's not about judging your shortcomings, but it is about recognizing just the uniqueness of who God's made you to be. And this is meant to give you freedom, not limit you. So here's just some examples to give you an idea of what I might write inside the circle. I might write that I am introverted. That means I need a lot of time alone to get recharged. That's something helpful to know about how I'm wired. I am introspective. I tend to live in my head a lot, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Sometimes that gets me in trouble, but it's also a good thing. It means I think deeply about things, and that's a part of myself that as I come to embrace it, I see the beauty of it. Other things that are true about me are that I'm a writer, I'm a teacher. Those are unique gifts God has given me that are a part of my wiring and who I am. So a couple examples of what I'd write outside the circle. I already mentioned that I'm not outgoing. I'm not going to be the life of the party. I'm not an extrovert. I don't get energy from being around a lot of people a lot of times. Does that mean I don't ever want to be around people? No, of course not. But a part of who I am not is an extrovert. I'm not someone that needs to be around a lot of people a lot of time. Another thing I'd write down is that I am not type A. I am not someone who is super driven and just task focused and get things done. That is not a part of who God's created me to be. So one thing I do want to caution here, when it comes to what you write outside the circle, sometimes we've decided something is not true of us when really it might be something that we just need to grow in. Or maybe it's a part of ourselves that is true, but we've rejected it. Maybe because it doesn't line up with who we think we should be, or maybe we've been criticized for it in the past. We just don't always see ourselves clearly. So that's why it's so important that as you do this practice, you ask God to show you how He sees you and how He's made you. Really pray over each thing that you write down. After you do this exercise, kind of look back over it and bring that into God's presence and ask Him to show you your true and authentic self, because there may be some things that He really wants to reveal to you through this exercise. Hopefully, as you do this practice, you're able to let go of who you think you should be and walk in the freedom of who you are. We still pay attention to areas we need to grow in, but we have to let go of the pressure to be someone that we're not. Because if we're going to show up in the world as our full and true selves, we first have to know who that even is. For me, I'm learning how to leave the timid little girl behind, but I'm also letting go of the need to perform or present myself as having it all together. I can show up in the fullness of my strength and my weakness, knowing that God is helping me become more and more of my true self in Christ. Because I don't want to just be myself, but to see myself become more and more like Jesus. So I hope that this short practice can help you recognize who God has created you to be, that you can stop hiding and show up as you truly are in the world without the need to perform or prove yourself, letting go of what's not you so that you can walk in the freedom of who you are. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Simple Spiritual Practices. If you want to download a free printable for this week's practice or find other resources to help you take next steps, visit lindsaysturkey.com/free. This podcast is part of the New Hope Podcast Network, and production is done by Darren Hansen. You can check out all the podcasts on the network by visiting newhopechurch.cc/listen. Make sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode, and we'll be back with a new episode next week.